We were wondering how would Pat Keaton have been recruited into the IRA to begin with? Like, what would the kind of local activity been around here that he would have got started in the IRA?
Well, I'd imagine he got started in the IRA in Nungarrow. He worked in Nungarrow, he worked in Lawn, and Dan Traha was Lawns was the clothes shop, wasn't it?
And was Lawns the Drapers?
The Drapers, yeah.
Yeah, he was a Draper's assistant.
And Dan Traha was a Draper just across. And he was also involved, let's say, a bit with the Gaelic League. Dan Traha would have been an organizer for the Gaelic League as well. So, I mean, I'd say the Republican thing came from the Gaelic League. It came from being in town with Dan Traha, I'd imagine.
And he was a bit different, wasn't he, Pat Keaton? Like, he had more education than a lot of the local fellows would have had. Like, you can see from his school record, he stayed on, like, well, in maybe 7th class, stayed on in primary school. And then the fact that he went as a draper's assistant would have meant that his father and mother would have had to pay.
Yeah.
They had to pay, what would they call it, some kind of fees. He wasn't paid, like, for his training. So he was
being an apprentice. Like.
Yeah, and I'd say he was good in school, You could see his school record was kind of unbroken, His primary school record now.
Would that have been the same for his siblings, or would it just he might have been like a bright student and that's why his education lasted longer?
Well, I'd say he was a bright student. I'd say Lena was bright as well, but the rest of them wouldn't I'd say,
We can't say
but it was on.
So you'd know by the records if people were good in school, they would have been kept on to the very.
They would have been encouraged to stay on.
And then you'd see, like I was just looking, that Seán Fitzgerald, he might have left in 3rd or 4th class.
Okay.
A lot of people left in 3rd or 4th class in those days. They didn't continue on to 6th class. So it kind of means either they wouldn't have had the money to send them in as apprentices to any kind of trade, like the drapery trade or anything like that. They would have had to go out working. And I just found, I was just in anticipation of this kind of thing today. I was looking up to see, could I find out who Seán Fitzgerald was, because there's not much about him, mainly because he doesn't have descendants in the parish, I think. At least we don't know of anyone. We never came across anyone, and there was never much talk about him. So, except what Lena said, that's Pat's Keating's sister. She said he was a great friend of Pat's. But
he went to England young, she said, and only came back when he heard that. Well, he heard the rumour that Pat had been killed at Tramore, at the Tramore ambush.
He thought that was what happened.
Yeah, but wrong, and he came back because of that, but that wasn't true. That rumor,
And the other thing I found about him is he was there in the census of 1901 in Garth Vicarage, but in 1911, in the census, he was staying in Ballinclay as a servant, and he was only about 12 at the time. So, I mean, he was left school, he was staying there as a servant, and that was very common.
A farm servant.
A farm servant, a farm servant, you know what I mean? They wouldn't call him a labourer, I suppose, even. But the strange thing was, the people he was staying with were powers. And there was a man and woman. The woman was, her maiden name was Lennon, because I'm guessing that now. I'm assuming her maiden name was Lennon because the head of the household, he was 30, I can verify all this year, he was about 37, and he was power, but his wife was 43, they had no children, and the mother-in-law was Lennon, and she was living with them, and I assume that house is now powers of, we don't know much about it, but
yeah,
I'm just wondering, I mean, you can't be saying things there, can you? You can edit this out, can you?
We can, of course.
Oh, yeah.
I'm talking about Seán Fitzgerald, like he's a young lad and he's age 12 and he's in this household in Ballinclay with Mr. and Mrs. Power and the grand, and she's Lennon. So that house was Lennon's, you see. And we know that from one of the Lennons married one of the Murphys, Sean's people from Ring.
Oh, wow.
in America, and they ended up in what was this?
New Orleans.
New Orleans.
St. Louis.
St. Louis, yeah. And we
A
had
lot of people were there.
they came from there. They came back. Descendants came back, and we took them to the house, and they had a look around and all the rest of it. So we know that was Lennon's, and it was either Lennon's or Lenines or Lannon's.
Very difficult to.
We don't know much about the Seán Fitzgerald because we didn't have any connections in the parish, and we didn't know a lot about him. And he went away to England and came back and died almost so long.
Fairly soon.
Fairly soon after coming.
It was a couple of weeks, I think.
Yeah. It was only just after joining the column when he was.
I think it was. Yeah, David was saying that he read somewhere it was his first engagement at the ambush in the Burgery, which is it's sad. And I think he was only a short time in England as well.
Yeah. So I don't know where he would have been between 1911 and he was only 12, I think, according to that census.
So he was 22, so what age was he when he died?
Well, we know it's written down somewhere.
12 and 1911. Yeah, he'd be 22. 10 years later.
And they said he was a friend.
He was in he was what?
He was Pat Keating's friend. So I just looked, they were in school in Kilrossanty at the same time. But there was an age gap of about 4 years. So they would have been there at the same time. Like I was saying to David there earlier on that Seán Fitzgerald left school maybe in, I don't know, 3rd or 4th class. I can look at that. He would have left school at that stage, whereas Pat Keating would have stayed on, and would have done 8-9 years in primary school.
Did he do it? What was the monitor?
Well, you see, any bright boy in back in those years, they were often held on in school and into 7th class, and they might do 7th class twice. And when they went in 7th class, Kilrossanty School had a cupboard when I was there, when I was young, and it was full of scientific instruments, testing fire, those tubes and glass things. We were fascinated with but they were there from that time when they would have done those kind of classes with senior pupils, and senior pupils remained on then and became monasteries.
Just following on from what you're saying, Pat Keating being a good student, is there any background available on where his interest in poetry came from?
No, well, except that he supposedly wrote those poems, and they were
published in the Munster Express, like that's how someone came about it,
That's how we have,
But you see that at that time, George Kiley was a reporter from the Munster Express as well.
Okay.
George Kiley, who would be Judith Flynn's father. You don't know Judith. No, she wouldn't have been there in your time. She taught in Kilrossanty just before me. I got her a job in 1969. Judith Flynn. Jerry Flynn.
I think she taught, ma'am.
Judith, she was Judith Kiley.
But her father then was the reporter for the Munster Express. And he was on the flying column at the time. He was still sending reports for the Munster Express, which was usual.
Yeah, and
the inside lines though.
And he was very literate, he was.
Oh, he was well read, and one of these.
Even after the War of Independence and during the Second World War, he used to send reports to the papers in England. He sent me a big report one time about a monkey had come in on the tide in Dun and Bratton and it was up in the tree and throwing coconuts down to people. Because he was here in Ireland, people write what he liked. He used to write all these stories,
And he actually made his living from it. He wrote reports for various newspapers, and Judith often told me that when she was going to college, this would be back in the early 60s, and going to secondary school, that was his only living. That was their only income, their small farm. And she'd go in to the post office to post something to the Irish Press or the Independent or whatever, something he'd write, and he'd get remuneration for that back then to pay for such a thing. He was talented.
Yeah, if you ever look up the Munster or the Dungarvan Observer and you can call them Tayside Tidings, they're his.
Oh.
Tayside Tidings, George Kiley,
So, David, you weren't the only journalist.
And he wasn't there to tell yarns. He could tell good yarns. But he was very clever. a very flowery language. Like everybody was doing dancing to the lights, fantastic in the Rainbow Hall.
Tripping to the lights, fantastic.
The Bodie sister came off, they came home to their roof tree, like, you know, everything was, you know.
He told the news, but he embroidered.
Yeah, he embroidered.
It's worth looking at, you know, and thinking about the man. And he actually, Judith gave us a loan of his, what did you call it? The thing he had in Tin Town.
Oh, yeah.
Like his journal, was it?
His journal, you know.
It was more not that book rather than a journal.
You know, they got each inmate or whatever to do a page or like an autograph book and draw a picture, my door, poem or something.
Oh, cool.
Because Pat Keaton was friendly with him. Pat Keaton being...
So the picture in the book was considered Pat
George
Keaton.
and Pat.
Yeah.
The best picture we had actually of Pat Keaton was taken with him, I don't know.
Yeah.
The other one.
Yeah, it's a lovely clear photo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can see him.
Like Judith will talk a lot now about her father and about George. In the beginning, when we did the first book about, when was that?
In 1980, wasn't it?
It was early, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And people didn't talk, you know, people didn't want to talk about it and didn't want to be associated with it. And you tell her how you came about it.
And you see, like, as well as that too, I was working with the Department of Social Welfare, and there was a coalition government in power at the time. We brought out these books of the IRA, like, and here I was, the civil servant, writing about the IRA and the troubles hot in the north. You know? Yes. I was nervous, like, you know, I thought, you know,
it was risky.
If somebody in Dublin got hold of the book like this, that's what I'd be on, Gavin, he's an IRA man. And, but anyway, I was worried about that. But one day I was over at North Carolina anyway, and who was in there getting his car service was us, DC. And he was the Minister for Agriculture at the time. And here up on the dashboard of his car was whatever book he was reading it, you know.
Jeez.
Yeah, that's wrong. He started to contradict me then, I think. No, but he was very interested.
No, because his father,
you see, was with Tom Barry.
Oh.
Tom Barry, even though he had entered the guards afterwards. He was sergeant easy. But as I say, like, I was lucky then. But just to go back to explain how I got the book done.
You see, Seán was not interested in the IRA or anything like that. You know, you hadn't any.
No, I was only interested.
Particular interest in it, yeah.
Yeah, and we did an article one time for the Dacia magazine. One of the first articles we ever did was for the Dacia magazine. It was the very first.
The very first edition.
Oh, we wrote a silly thing about standing stones or something, you know, the commoners.
It was nothing. Nothing. A child would have written it.
Then we did a little article about the IRA, kind of like a thing, and then it gets back from the Gab and that kind of thing. And they asked us, would we look up, you know, do research on the IRA in Waterford, like. And I thought to myself, I don't know, the only way we could do that now is if I could get to know Pat Whelan. He was alive at the time. So I called over on it to Pat anyway on the chance, and I explained what I was looking for. And he said, "Oh, you're going doing that for us?" Well, I said, "The old Water Society asked me to do that." I wouldn't have had to do their credit or Shawnee. I would have had to do it them now. You know, I best of luck, he says, "No, I wouldn't." So I kind of went away then. I was disappointed, like, you know, because I kind of missed out.
There's no point in it.
So anyway, I was over the office then, maybe 40 minutes, 3 weeks after, I knocked him on the door. And John Michael Street, a small man, Gavin, called into me. Hey, he said, "Pax is looking for you again," he said. Oh, I said, "How do you know?" I was over a minute ago. He sent me over to tell you, come over on your way home, he said. So I called in on you that evening at Pax again and said, I was thinking about that book, he said. If you did it yourself, he said, don't give it to the old Water Society crowd. You do it yourself, get it printed, he said, downstairs or whatever you like. I had to, he said. Oh my God, I said, I will, of course, that's grand. I said, we did that. So, and we had to do some, Seth and Mick Mansfield, they came out here a couple of good few nights, didn't they?
They did, yeah. They'd come out with Seán in the evening from work, and they'd have the supper or tea or dinner or whatever, and we'd drive them back that night. You know. And I was able to go in and out of the house and in and out of Big Mansfield and into the wife, and we got complete freedom. And then because they said then, you know, that we were doing it,
I was able to talk to the Nimber Cassidy, I was able to talk to Sonny Coleman, I was able to talk to all the different places that were still alive, you know. And I got to know that way.
And you knew them through the pension?
I knew them through the pension because, you see, at that time, a lot of them had what they called army service pension, you know, an old pension that the Valera brought in before that, like for anybody who had been on in the troubles. But you see, as the pension officer then, I had to visit them every 4 years to make sure they were still alive and that they hadn't won the sleep or something, you know.
Take the money
off if they had too much money, you know. So and you know, you get chat. I used to chat with men, you know, who they were, what they were involved in. I got to know Jack Mayer, like that. I got to know nearly all of them that were still alive at the time, you know. And one fella tell me one thing, another fella tell me different. They contradict each other. I don't mind that fella. He wasn't there. Now, he wasn't there. He had to get the money. That's the thing was going on. But there was another good story there about the Nipper. The Nipper was his name is Michael. Jack McCarthy was his name. John McCarthy. But he was known as the Nipper because he was a small man, like, you know. But he was on the column one day. They were going to go from house to house anyway. They went to this house anyway, and the woman in the house gave them their dinner night. And the next, you know, she spotted that the Nippers' trousers was all torn because they were in rags and filthy and everything. So she called them down to the room and she gave them a spare trousers. She said, "Look, you see, George Lennon wouldn't want them to get taken anything from anyone, you know, only just the food is all they want, you know." So she told me about sticking the trousers up under his jacket, like, you know, don't tell Lennon, like, she gives them. So they were going off then on wherever they were going anyway. And Nicholas said, "Hold on a minute, I'm to go down here, I'm not to go to the toilet." He said, "You know." And he went down around the corner anyway, and he had a chance to put on the new trousers, like, you know. Came back then and said, "Where'd you get that?" Oh, he said, "I made it the other day." He said, "I stuck a good in these jacket trousers."
The next one is, how aware of Pat Keating's exploits would the parish of Kilrossanty have been at the time, and what would the overall attitude have been to the exploits and to the ongoing?
Everybody knew what their loyalties were, because Pat Keating's father, wasn't his father had been in Kilkenny jail in the land.
Oh yeah.
I think I'm not too sure about that, but he was arrested anyway in the land. So I'm sure they had, you know, that he would have been brought up with stories about that and so on.
And the same with the eviction out in 12 acres, the woman that lost her place.
Oh yeah, you know, there were evictions happened at that time. There was one terrible eviction about 18. Well, I haven't sure the date. I would say between 1885 and 1890, when a man. Powers of the 12-acre wood. You might have heard of the 12-acre wood out near Ned Hyde Crom's cottage.
Yeah,
you know, the ruinous. Yeah. He was just trashing at Langley's Pay Lodge, which is Pay Lodge, where Murphy's Pay Lodge, and that was Langley. He was the land agent for the palaces, the farms, for the whole estate and all that around there. And he was killed. His arm was torn off. Yeah, his name was Power. His leg was torn off in a horse thrashing machine. And they put, you know, in those days, they just put him on a door. He was carried back up to the 12-acre wood, which had been up from the back of Keating. And he died 2 days later. But anyway, his widow and 4 or 5 children, they were evicted. Well, they said the following week, now I don't know was it like that, but they were evicted from their little holding, which was belonging to the Farehams, and it would have been, Langley would have come to evict them. But Keating's took them in. The Keatings cleaned out, you know, an outhouse of some sort, as they said to the hen house, but whatever it was, some kind of outhouse, and they allowed them to stay in that. And then eventually they got up to where John Patrick Welsh is big Welsh, Jimmy Welsh now is in there now, but they had a little house and they gave it to the Masterwood, and then they all immigrated to Boston. You know, all those people were in a place called, what's the name of the place in Boston? They had a whole colony of people who went from Ballinclay and Cumra and all that, and they all congregated in a certain area of Boston.
They went to Holyrood and Worcester.
Worcester.
Yeah. Boys of Kilrossanty people. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, all around Cumber and all that. So they knew each other. So those powers ended up, and I still have. Well, I have my cousin. Would have been in contact with that family up to recently. You know,
wow.
In contact with the powers, you know, and they were ancestors to the breed of Crossy. You know, those people. They were powers out there in the Trollmaker work. But that was an eviction. But that kind of thing would have been going on. So, and the key things being, you know, educated, well read, and so on for the time would, I'm sure, have been involved, and everybody would have known it, and they would have been well regarded, wouldn't they?
I would, yeah.
They would have been well regarded by everybody in the locality, maybe, and regarded or respected by the Fairhams and, you know, the local aristocracy, maybe not feared, but respected, I'd say, by you know, everybody.
In esteem.
They would have been well got.
And you see, like this area here too would have been quite. I wasn't nationalistic, but the Gaelic, you know, because you have Bob Weston here, and you had Carmody, and the Miss Fairhams were interested in the Gaelic League, and they were all, the Gaelic League was very strong, you know. Pat the Shop was in the Gaelic League, and so like. The revival of Irish would have been strong here, and that would have led to nationalism as well, as you say.
And talking about the poetry, there was a lot of poetry reciting and composing and everything, and learning Irish going on. You had Pat Power and Mahon Bridge, the dandy Pat, and, you know, James, who died, his father would have won gold medals at the Feis or whatever for his reciting of poetry. And he would often have recited poetry written by Bob Weldon. But as you know, Bob Weldon composed poetry in Irish, but couldn't write in Irish. But the local Protestant schoolmaster, Patrick Carmody, was able to transcribe it and have it sent to Melleray to Abbot Maurice O'Whailon, who would go over and, you know, correct, because none of them were sure of their Irish at that time. And they would have sorted it out, you know. But then there are all these things, connections going up to Halley's there at the Protestant church. Miss Atchison, who was at Hobbs's, she was a musician, but she could write and read music, you know, so she took down tunes and that for them. And then you had, there were stacks up here in Carmahan, and one of those was an RIC man, and he might have been involved in the eviction. And he saw so many horrible things in the evictions that he left and went to, I don't know whether he went to Worcester, Massachusetts, or where this before.
I don't know how he went.
And he wrote poetry as well. So there's a lot of people, you know, a lot of poetry going on, and it was the thing to be in. I suppose maybe it was a bit like pop music or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
but we have.
But it has to be too at the period of the Gaelic revival as well. You know, from 1900 onwards, like up to 19. Everyone was going strong up to the Great War, 1914. Then that kind of changed everything. Then, you know, that resurrected the idea of nationalism too. Because because they were hoping to get home rule then for Ireland, and the Great War stopped that, like, you know. So nationalism and the Gaelic thing all kind of merged in together.
Yeah, so to go back to what you said, what would people in the parish have, how would they have regarded them? I'd say very favourably.
Very favourably, yeah.
And would have sheltered them and helped them in any way they could, you know, and they had safe places. They were never raided, were they? They were raided. The house, Keating's was raided.
Yeah, but they were even told, for instance, like Tom Hunt talks about when the trouble.
Tom Hunt, now that's Robin Hunt's brother.
Before they burned.
He only died recently.
Yeah.
He was 800, you know.
He was very disgusted that they burned Rockdown, because he said that these men used to be in the kitchen getting fed. He said they'd come down off the hills. He said come in we didn't ever say anything about him. He said they'll come in being fed by the maids in the back kitchen, like, you know.
Yeah, he wrote to me in his latter years, because I got in touch with him. I never actually met him, but he was a brilliant man to write, and it's such a pity that I didn't get to know him years ago, you know, because he had so many stories and memories. And he talked about the night when Rockmount was burned, and he remembered being carried in his night clothes down to Woodhouse in Stradbally by the nanny or the governess or whoever was there at the time, you know. They were taken out before the house was burned. he gave the date and everything. He could remember.
Yeah.
He remembered it, you know. But he didn't hold any animosity towards.
No, his only animosity was that they burned the house, and they had been having their meals.
They would have been in them and would have been fed.
In the back, they come in down up the hill. He said in the back and have the, you know, that to be the key and so on, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, and then like he had, but they were outside us, the burnt. The burnt.
That's what they say. Yeah.
They say. So they say. We don't know.
Well, your burnt was burnt on instructions, like. You know?
Yeah, it was. And Cummer House were they the same night?
Yeah.
And the joke used to be they tried to burn Tail Lodge as well, but it was too damp. John Hobbs used to say that. Yeah. They tried to burn your place, but it was too damp. Yeah.
Is there much known about?
But it was always said. I mean, it was always, you know, said that. Did Lena say it exactly? Did Lena acknowledge this?
She acknowledged what it came, but she didn't say that they were.
She didn't say they were engaged. Some people say they were engaged.
Just, I think it was Ivan Lenin's essay that he wrote, or maybe it was part of his book that he wrote, that he mentions that it was his Pat Keaton's last words were to tell Mary Cullinan that he was asking for her, I think. And then I think there was something recently, Katie, online, was there, that somebody said they were engaged?
The women of the revolution.
I don't know where the sources are for it. You know, if there's any sources for it, I don't know.
Yeah. Add it on to as you go along.
That's the thing.
Which is, yeah, but I suppose the question, if we had known, we would have asked the right question at the right time, but it was
Pat Whelan never said that.
There's no one's asking, yeah. Pax, no, see, Pax wouldn't have been that close to
no, he wouldn't.
Mary Cullinan, I know. He was Dungarvan. He was more, see, Pax was more Dungarvan and up.
And he had responsibility
like,
for big areas as well,
Yeah.
You know, more, he was up there kind of thing.
You wouldn't know the personal sides of the lads, you'd know the.
But I mean, it's quite. I mean, there was some connection anyway, because when he was buried up here, just 2 fields behind our house here for, how long? 6 weeks? No.
6 or 8 weeks, yeah. What did it do?
Yeah, they were concealing his.
March, July, wasn't it? So yeah.
She used to come up. Well, they said she used to come up to visit the grave, go across the river. The Keatons used to come down the Crew Wood and cross the river into the place where he was.
Of course, the story is.
I mean, we can't.
She was arrested, like coming back from the funeral, like, you know, after all.
And there was no photograph of the two of them together. So we didn't see any photograph.
I don't know unless Andy Kelly has.
No, I don't think there was, because Lena, Pat's sister, would have been very friendly with Kent always. But
Lena was educated and she was articulate, you know, she was confident, like.
Yeah, she was.
So because Pat was a similar kind of person, you know. I think Tom Keaton wasn't that kind.
Tom wasn't the same.
He wasn't involved in the War of Independence at all. He only got involved after Pat was killed.
Gee.
Yeah.
Made him get into it.
Yeah.
But, you know,
because Lena did a lot of the paperwork for the pensions application. Afterwards, she did the majority of the paperwork for the mother and father.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. She's good at
and all the letters and everything.
So was Maureen Kent.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Maureen Kent used to do an awful lot of. She was on the pension board.
Oh, yeah.
Maureen Kent.
Oh,
yeah. And Pat was talking about, you know, the IRA pensions thing, the statements and that. Pat would have seen, and he would have taken exception to some things and fallen out with a few people.
He did, yeah.
They contradict them, and that's it. You know, you can imagine.
Yeah.
You want to get the pension, so you might say you were such a place.
Yeah.
Might say, no, I don't get it all.
Yeah, you weren't actually there.
But he was very straight, wasn't he?
Oh, he was, yeah. He was straight. That's what's wrong. He was straight, like, you know, he was straight. The guy. He was a gentleman, like, you know.
A real gentleman, yeah. And I mean, he would have shot people, I suppose, but, you know, and he was very well read as well, wasn't he? Yeah. And Mick Mansfield as well, you know. There were two real gentlemen now. You wouldn't associate them with. I mean, I suppose they were a little older, weren't they? Pax was
a little older, Mick, but yeah, they were, yeah.
Yeah. And they kind of had to get job. Someone kind of had to
when Pax came back after when the whole thing was over and he came back from jail. He was a plumber, this is his job, a plumber. He couldn't get a job anyway. The only person who gave him a job was Newton Temple. Protestant. The job's all right. He used to love working in Newton Temple because they had a great library. He's good. He's been all day of evening. He's a good library in the house, you know.
And Pat Keaton had books as well. You know, people having books in a house then wasn't common.
Funny enough, we have a book here belonging to Pat Keaton that Eddie Penn gave me years ago. And to an unusual book, what it is the history of the 1641 rebellion in Waterford. And this is a rare book.
Well, it was rare now, but at the time
it was rare. It was rare because what it was is somebody went up to the National Archives in 1910 or something.
Before they were born. And extracted all the reports of the Waterford area after the 1641 rebellion. And in 1922, then that place was all burned.
Gee,
so all the Waterford one, but he had saved all the Waterford ones. And now they're trying to piece together the rest of their bits of them now, and they're trying to. They're
pulling in stuff from all over the world to try and recreate. I was in the custom house and digitize it. You know, I mean, they can do great things nowadays. When we started off this, we hadn't a photocopier, writing it down. We couldn't even take a photograph of something.
No,
we had nothing. You know, I mean, nowadays you see a piece, you see somebody has something, you just get a camera and click it, and you're there. You know.
Yeah.
But we had no access to anything.
And if you had to copy it, you wrote it, and you had to put carbon paper underneath it and write down.
We had.
So it really was a labour of love. You had to be into it.
Yeah. Do you remember the Gestetner in school when we did the newsletter? Really, rolling off the copies on
that was an innovation.
that was very.
And then we got a photocopier at work then, and you could peel the sheets together, you know.
Torture. You'd have to write to the National Archives and wait for a month, and you might get an answer back.
Oh God.
It's very hard to do any kind of.
Everything's online now, nearly. It's just we can read all the witness statements today, like if we wanted to. It's so much easier.
With nothing like that.
Yeah, I used to see some of the witness statements that time because that have copies of their own statements. Then I used to ask them for a loan of their statement, and I try and get the copy somewhere, you know.
You got a few that way before they were. This is way back.
Yeah. I used to type. I used to bring home. You have to type them out.
And I had a bad typewriter with some letters on it.
Just going back to the witness statements, actually, there's a lot of, you mentioned already, there's a lot of inaccuracies, people contradicting each other, one person saying one thing and stuff. Is there any likelihood that Pat Keaton shot twice, or was that just a kind of myth that kind of grew over time, or was he only shot once, or how did it happen?
Yeah.
Well, I understood from different statements that what happened was that Fitzgerald got shot, and Pat Keaton tried to go out to rescue him, and he got shot, but he dragged back in, and then he went the second time then to try and rescue him, and that's why he got shot the second time.
Okay.
But sure, I mean,
he was brave. He was brave, wasn't he? But you said Plunkett got them into it.
Plunkett got them into it. Plunkett demanded that they have this ambush, and Plunkett demanded they should go back for them. And Plunkett was in charge, like, and he should have rather than going back to Ballycourt first day, he should have collected all the ammunition and all that and thrown around the ground. Brought that. See, that's what happened. They said the back to collect this ammunition, right? And they actually, Kelly Donovan and the Nipper, they went back to blow up the lorry. And they went back and blew up the lorry earlier, but still didn't bring back the stuff. It was daylight then, and they started going back for the stuff. And Pax decided then that when he is funny enough now in the very first manuscript we did, I gave it to Pax to read it. He kept it for maybe a fortnight or so, and then he left work to be in to call in to see him. And I got in and he said, no, Sean, he said, I think everything is grand to that, but you look at one piece you must change. He said, right. You said that when Plunkett said to go back for the guns, I objected to going back for the guns. He said, I didn't object, he said. Maybe I should have objected, maybe, but I didn't object, but I did think it was unwise to go back for the guns, he said. Maybe if I'd objected, they wouldn't have gone back, he said, but it just, I didn't object, that I just thought it was unwise to go for the guns. So I had to change that sentence then. That's all. And that was the only sentence in the whole book I had to change.
Yes. Yeah, and you said Plunkett, he said Plunkett was very aggressive.
Bully, yeah.
Oh.
Bully.
Yeah.
Really?
Came down from Dublin, you know, and I suppose he thought there were lots of Yahoos down there.
They were doing that. They were doing that.
Yeah, they had no clue what they were doing when they were doing it. Yeah.
And it was probably after the Tramore ambush, which was a bit of a fast, like the Tramore ambush, like ended up a bit of a fast in that they went with Nick Switching, actually, wasn't it?
Yeah.
He fired a shot too soon. He got scared and fired a shot too soon, and that upset the whole thing. And then he went on to be write things in the paper afterwards that he's a big hero, that he was saying, and that upset the whole thing. And then he went on to be write things in the paper afterwards that he's a big hero, that he was saying everyone, because he fired the first shot.
More contradictions again.
Yeah.
He wrote a book
Yeah.
called, what was it called?
Jensen County.
Jensen County.
Yeah. He wrote that. But he wrote a witness statement for Dr. Vincent White as well. And of course, colour himself and he couldn't like that.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
you see, filter it.
Yeah.
You know.
See, the city crowd were, they never really got going right at all. They were never really, they had the same goal. They had the same leadership, I suppose, as the county crowd, you know.
Yeah, the county crowd were very united, weren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would that have played into the fact that I suppose the county crowd had the Cumra Mountains to fall back in, and maybe more areas to practice rather than the city lads?
Yeah.
Oh,
Is that a stretch?
But city lads as well. You see, they had the Redmondite crowd to deal with as well, and the Ballybritain crowd. You know, the politics was very strong. They were very limited in politics in the city. They were the underdogs in the city, whereas in the county, the nationalists were very strong. They were stronger in the county between Dungarvan and Lismore and Kilrossanty. They weren't so strong in Kilmac now. Kilmac was a bit weak.
A Shoneen town, they call it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Back in Kilmac, is it?
They was a breakaway from the bank.
Oh, well.
Yeah,
Oh, they
the
were.
Pegs had to bring them in, brought before the bank manager. And the bank manager was able to pick them out with the fellas there. Before that.
Oh, yeah, one was shot.
One ended up and he was shot in Palestine, Mickey Bishop.
Did you put that in?
No,
We didn't
but
write that for
Mahan went looking for him in Palestine, he couldn't find him.
because they had their own courts and everything, they had, the IRA had their own courts. And,
Yeah, that was during the truce now.
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And actually be very
Yeah.
straight-laced about everything, no blackguarding.
Oh, yeah.
Blackguarding people. There's a lot going on now about how are women treated by, how are women and young girls treated by the IRA and, so
Yeah.
when they were posted in people's houses and that, what way were they treated, There's a lot of that going on. And I think
I never seem to get any, wrong things now.
No.
Well,
it wasn't talked about. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just in the back of my head. Did Pat say something about somebody? They had some court case in
Well,
Kilmac.
there was a court case in Kilmac, because me fancy said there was a court case that fellow was up for rape.
Raping
in front of the IRA court, and he was fined. He was fined £100 for whatever, and with the and stuff from the fellows are used to white trench coats after that.
Yeah.
And McManus said that when he came out of the court that day, the courthouse in Kilmac, who passed up to him after hunt with a car and put out his valve and said after hunt, I made after hunt driving to Gomra.
Well, they took the car off the hunt as well, yeah.
Yeah, they were going to the Tramore ambush. And they arrived down in Brockmount, and they did that to hunt Johnson's car. And the nipper was going to be the driver.
And he was such a little fella.
And he had a big revolver in his holster on his leg, you know. And all that, I said, where are you going with that? He said, take that off that child, he said, he'll shoot himself in the leg. And the nipper was going to shoot him. So we said, he's called me a young fella. But like, the hunt wasn't afraid of them or anything. Like, you know, when you say, you know, I mean, he had to give him the car. He knew he had to give him the car. Yeah. But the guy got back again. Oh, yeah.
He got it back again, you know, so. I mean,
yeah, they were just borrowing it for a little while.
Yeah.
The nipper gave me a statement when he was in bed.
Yeah.
He was inside his bed, right?
He was old. Yeah.
He was old. He was sick at the time.
Was he dying?
No.
There's a tape of him.
Is there?
Yeah, I have it. Yeah, I have the tape. Oh.
Yeah.
Cool. What other?
I suppose going back to the ambush, the night of the ambush, we're wondering why his comrades were so quick to decide on leaving Pat Keaton behind for the British to capture. Was it just kind of into the moment, or just?
No, behind.
Yeah,
oh,
I think just in the witness statement, going off the witness statements again, and obviously there's lots of contradictions, but it said that Plunkett was the only person who wanted to go back to retrieve Pat Keaton when he was wounded and still conscious. The rest of them said it was a suicide mission. So we're just wondering, I mean, it's probably just in the heat of battle, I suppose, but it just seemed a bit unusual to be leaving him behind when he's still conscious. And if there was maybe any insight into that, or...
Well, you see, you have to remember that fellas that were there were only young fellas that wasn't used to, you know, they were under fire, like, you know.
Yeah.
They did get them.
What it is, Tunkel affected. Tunkel got
yeah.
But like, I mean, you know, Tunkel was much more experienced than they were.
Yeah.
They were only all young fellas, you know, Garvin, like, around locally, you know.
They wouldn't have seen anything to that extent before, or...
I'd put him into it.
Yeah, they wouldn't have seen that kind of action.
No.
Would Pat Keaton have been mostly dressed in the uniform? You know, the picture of him. Would he mostly been going around in his uniform, or would it have been civilian clothes?
I would civilian clothes, yeah.
Yeah. They wouldn't have worn those.
Oh no, I would imagine. So they wouldn't have had you. I'd be civilian clothes, like, you know.
Yeah. Kind of.
Well, he would have had a uniform. Yeah. He would have had a uniform, but the rest of them would have civilian clothes, like, you know.
And bits of uniform. Yeah. And bits of uniform, I suppose. You know, the dailies that came back from the war, and that they would have had bits of army uniforms. They would have had, you know, all sorts of.
Well, he might have got a uniform. He might have got it from that Praha, the Gaelic.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Like, he wouldn't have been wearing the uniform if he's going around like that either, you know.
No, he'd be kind of trying to keep under the radar to a degree as well.
Yeah. Cool. Which of the dailies was it?
Mike Daly.
Was Michael Tom? It was Jack and Mike.
Michael died, didn't he?
Two of them were killed.
Michael and Patrick were killed.
Yeah. Which one was Jack? I'd have to look again. And there was one fella then who was the priest's stable boy, the other brother.
Yeah.
And his sister, wasn't it?
And there was a sister as well, I think.
Helping them with the training.
Oh, yeah, Mike, yeah.
Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, so I know, yeah.
Well,
there was a big I know it's all completely off topic, but wasn't there a big parade when he was going off to war in 1914? There was like the fife and drum band walked him down to Kilmacthomas to the station, and I think there was obviously more than him going away that day. But I remember that scene from your books, and just
and the blacksmith, Harris's horse, wasn't it?
Yeah. That's how it became kind of militaristic as well, because they were putting an army together for home rule.
Yes.
you know, and that's how the Irish volunteers and the national volunteers, like, you know.
Yeah.
The volunteers was saying that everybody was going to originally till the war broke out then, and then after during when the war broke out then they decided no, they didn't want. They split then. The Gaelic volunteers we call them, then they split, and the main bodies they went up with Redmond, like, so that's how Waterford City like was so much in favour of Redmond, because so many people had followed Redmond to Redmond like in the First World War, like, and was killed. Like, you know.
And you would think there about the local people. People are always afraid of being called informers or ending up being suspected of being informers as well, you know. What was on the other night there? When all that we saw on Nationwide.
Oh yes.
Yeah, but anyway, no, my grandfather came back from, he was in New Zealand and he was in the First World War, and he came back in 1919.
Yeah.
And like minus an arm and that, and he was on the mountain one day, and he met Pat Keaton and some of the lads over near Kilclooney, and he came back, and he was afraid for 2 weeks afterwards. He said, for 2 weeks, in case Pat Keaton would be captured, or in case something would have happened to them. And then someone said, we met Paddy Welsh on the mountain. He knew we were there. He must have, you know, because he had been a soldier in the First World War. He felt that he might be suspected. You know what I mean?
Jeez.
That he might be suspected of being an informer. People were a bit careful about what they said, and if they met somebody, they wouldn't tell anyone they saw them. You know.
Yeah, it's a little bit hush.
Yeah, and that was a protection for them as well.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you wouldn't be going around spreading the news about, oh, we saw Pat Keaton up at Kilkenny and a couple of the lads had guns or whatever. You know.
Yeah. It's kind of little bit. Yeah. Cool.
My grandfather was over County. They were County, and my father said back in 1940 something, my grandmother got a pension, and she couldn't believe it. My father met some politician in town who said that Mrs. Foley had no pension, and he said, oh my God, he said, that poor woman. He said, to doctor, we went in there for tea when we were on the run. He said, you know, Mickey Morris, and she got the pension for £0.50. She thought she won, well, it would have been the lotto to her, I suppose. You know, she was sitting up there, and £0.50 money they didn't have. You know, they would have it would be barked and swapped. You know, eggs, chicken, bugs, whatever. You know.
So to have physical money coming in every week or every month was worth anything.
But you know, they would have been sheltered all across the mountain, any houses high up along, they would have, and that's right what you were saying about, you know, the Cummins were a great.
See, the Cummins were a safe place from the South Tipperary Brigade as well, because a cousin of mine now was involved with the South Tipperary Brigade, coming and Tommy Ryan. He ended up in Bloody Sunday, playing for Tipperary in Bloody Sunday. But in his witness statement, or his statement, his is more of a book than a witness statement, and he says that they used the Common Mountains as a safe place from Tipperary as well. They used to come over Clonmel and up down to the back home, like into the Nile and all that. That's what it.
But those mountainy fellows would guide them as well. You know, the fellows in the Nile, even today, and the fellows here in Cumber, should they?
They know the areas that
they bring sheep over. You know, they bring sheep over at Gorman, bring them to Stubbs down in Kilmac, and the fellows that meet them, bring the sheep for them, bring them back up and meet them again at the gap. You know, they knew the mountains.
And the same thing now. There's a fellow going doing a film now about the last days of Liam Lynch, and that's the same thing again, because he used to cross over from Port Law, South Kilkenny, cross over at Port Law, across the river there, and up through like Gormac, then in through the Nile. And he used to stay in Kerwin, knocking up, like he stay up there.
On his way, all those.
And he was on the way. That's why he was on his way to Mitchellstown when he was shot. I don't know, over Newcastle.
I suppose there were certain houses you knew you'd always be welcome, you'd always be looked after, no questions asked.
They have no idea how to follow them on the mountains and those things.
No, they had no.
No. And they have Irish names on places and, you know, all that.
Yeah.
So it suited the IRA like that. There wasn't too much activity in the Common Mountains.
Yeah, it was nice and quiet.
As an escape, you know.
Yeah.
And if you go up on the mountain and you see, say, going over, look down over Keaton, like, you know, you can see where you could be up there, they could nobody catch them because should they see anyone coming straight away, they'd be gone off.
Yeah, you disappear in seconds, really, if you knew it well. Yeah.
Yeah, then hide, you'd be gone, like, you know.
Yeah.
And then hide the scrubs, like, you know, after Wormwood scrubs.
Oh, yeah, Wormwood.
Prisoners,
yeah, we kept few prisoners up there.
during the truce period, like they were the police, so they keep people prisoners. And there was a song made out that we won't work for the Willie Wally, we won't work for that, but we won't go pick the phones down and Lenny Bryan. That was one of the songs they had.
From?
What's that?
Is that where that came from? Because actually,
we won't work for the Willie Wally, the Connors, we won't work for that.
Actually, Pat Connors only told me about that recently. I was over with him, and he said he was in Edinburgh at a rugby match years ago with a crowd from Dublin. And they were in a pub in Edinburgh, and next minute he could hear from the other side of the bar someone singing that song. And his father would have been one of the Billy Wallies.
Yeah.
He was like, "Oh, in the name of God," is after coming over to Edinburgh after us. I never knew that's where it came from. That's brilliant.
Yeah. That was the time the strike that they had.
That's the time of the courts.
Oh yeah, but they had that. So when this is all over, you have an invitation to come and
thank you very much.
I would love that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That'd be epic.
Yeah, you have to be on the floor and I would paper around.
I don't think we mind.
It's border on it, but it's kind of a bit wonky. You know, you pull out something to show somebody, and you put it back in the wrong place.
Yeah. And how do you know what to classify things under? You know, you want to keep reference together, but you want to keep the subjects together.
Salmon, Kilrossanty, Kilmac, Mahbridge, Lenny Bryan, anything, you know.
Yeah.
Some
and then
came out and everyone. Because funny enough, we were asked by Mercy of Press to redo the book, like, you know. And I started doing it with Mercy of Press.
You even signed the contract, if you don't mind.
Yeah, and when I sent them the manuscript, they started changing it all. They made me refer to witness statements, not to my own.
Oh, yeah, your own interviews.
Yeah.
And I said, I got, in the end, I got so mad at them, I said I wouldn't do it because.
It's true that.
I said, no. Like everyone can see the witness statements. I mean, I have my own interviews with people that, you know, face to face. And I wanted to use them as the basis for what I was saying, you know. And they wanted to use the witness statement. I didn't want to use the witness statement.
Except when you knew,
So I mean, we fell out over that then.
So he just threw them. So
all right, stick your guns.
He put the run on. And I was waiting for them to come back and say, you signed the contract, and you know, anyway, they didn't.
They do nothing.
No. And they were going to be one of their projects by Father.
They were going to do a book for every county.
Oh, that would be cool.
Yeah, that would be a good idea.
That museum did it then, just as well, you know, the better.
Yeah.
They did better because they allowed me to put in all the things that I wanted to put in then. They allowed me to put in my own things.
And the profits went to the museum.
Yeah, it's fantastic what they're doing at the moment, actually, with the reprints and.
Really, he did a good job.
No, he's good for pushing things, really, isn't he? Don't be talking
about
it.
When we wanted to do something first day, we knew nothing at all about publishing or anything. And I went into Carrick. Carrick, there was a printers in there. Carrick print. You know, printers in Carrick. And I said, I want to do a little booklet, you know.
Booklet.
How much would it cost? Like, it's not how to know it. Would I? The man said to me, how many M's are on a page? He said. Jesus, I don't know what he was talking about. I thought he was talking about the letter M, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know what he was talking about. You come back and tell me how many M's are on the page. But what he meant, M is some kind of a measurement of letter cycles. You know, I didn't know that at the time.
How could you have known that, like?
So I was 74.
Oh,
But I did the job there for anyway. Paddy Lynch didn't want to know how many names were on the page. Paddy Lynch wanted to know how much would it say. So he charged me, you know, and I wish to
he charged a price that he knew you could sell.
And that he could make
that he could make with you, Bob, yeah.
Yeah, the first that was the very first thing we did, but that.
I mean, such, you know, in comparison to today.
And then when we went to do Cumber's Refuge of Rebels, then we went to printers in Clonmel, Kennedy Print. And they were so advanced that they had a golf ball typewriter.
Oh my God.
They could have golf ball typewriter. They didn't have to fix it. Paddy Lynch was fixing the letters in lead plate, like, you know. And he used to golf ball typewriter.
Oh, for God's sake, yeah. I mean, it's just hard to comprehend.
They had to screen print whatever picture was into it.
Oh, such complications, yeah. And now you just, I don't know.
Just press a button and it's done. But the Refuge of the Rebels has aged so well, like, because we still have a copy and it's immaculate, like, you know, it reads well, the pictures are clear. You couldn't
Kennedy Print.
Yeah,
you couldn't look at it and say that there were that many kind of issues in the run up to it or anything. It looks so well done.
Yeah, anyway, look, people can do fantastic
I found out about how sad stitching and cutting it. I was in with Paddy Lynch and we were cutting with a big guillotine, cutting pages.
Handmade.
Yeah.
Anyway, have you
Exactly. I think. I just no, not at all.
Thanks for the time anyway. We appreciate the time and all the insights. We do appreciate that.
We really appreciate it.
For you know, any other projects you've going, yeah. Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Seán Síle.
You know, you didn't change a bit from school anyway. Neither did
It was a good thing you're batting.
Yeah.
Still about 10. Okay.
Thanks a million.
She'd have dared seeing what age you.
Oh, well.
No, we didn't. We'd know better, I think.
We figure that out, yeah.
Brilliant.
So we'll be in touch, and
Yeah.
And you will be able to you can come and
hopefully not too long.
And you can just talk away.
Brilliant.
That'd be great. Thank you very much.
Mind yourself. Stay safe.
Yes, now.